All right, Instagram. Coming to you live today with a very special guest, Stephanos Safandos, where we'll be speaking to all things masculinity. So just waiting a few moments for these beautiful people to come on. Hey Oksana, what's up Dan? All right, there's the man, the myth, the legend himself. Okay. All right, it's doing something. Boom! In ultrasonic HD.
Yo, what's happening, man?
Brother, I am a little bit, chilly, but I'm equally as warm now that I'm seeing you, and the whole being is excited and lit up.
That's awesome. It's cold here too, man. It's I don't know, maybe minus 1 or 2 or something.
Minus 102?
Yeah.
And where do you live in the world?
Austin, Texas.
Okay, so -1 in Austin, Texas. Now, is this a natural occurrence, or do you feel there's some sort of a tertiary influence at play here?
No, Al Gore's definitely behind it.
Okay.
100%. No, it's January, February, March gets cold here in Austin, but January is this hit and miss. Yesterday was just nice, sunny and warm, and then it hits 11 p.m., 12 a.m., and then boom, just plummets to 0, -1, -2. It's fascinating, man. Like, Texas weather is no joke.
Well, fortunately, you are equipped for any condition.
I like to think so, but I don't know how true that is.
For those of you that don't know, my name is Nikhil, and Steph is a dear friend and brother of mine, and a huge inspiration and mentor. And today I have the joyful opportunity of interviewing him with respect to the topic of the evolution of masculinity. And I thought it was a fitting title, as when I think about the evolution of masculinity, I really see you at the forefront within the space, and not just masculinity, consciousness as well. But I just wanted to reflect that and honor you for the man that you are in the world, how you've inspired me, and also so many others in the space. So thank you.
Thank you, brother. And I received that, and to give you some some insights as well, which you obviously, not obviously, but you do know because you were there at inception. And what I mean by inception is when, a number of years ago, back in Western Australia, in Fremantle, Perth, Western Australia, when I really started moving through so much of my transformation, you were such a big support and such a big pillar in that, in not only supporting me emotionally and giving me reflection as a brother and as a dear friend, but also helping me move into the next expression, iteration of my life. And your skills and your gifts in the 3D world in doing that, and your skills and gifts in the spiritual, emotional, psycho-spiritual realm as well, definitely was a pillar in my life. So the reflections right back at you, brother.
Thank you. I very much received that fully, and you have really helped me as a man to open up my heart and to peel back some of those layers that have been there because of everything that I've been through in this lifetime, and really receive and embrace the human experience fully. So thank you. And honestly, I feel like without your presence in my life, I might not actually be here, because you were there for me in some very precarious moments. So thank you.
And the world is very happy, including myself, that you are here.
And I'm happy to be here during this precarious yet opportunistic time in the world right now. And I would love to just jump in there by framing the fact that in our collective sphere, there's a lot of intensity and movement and growth and change transpiring. With that being said, human beings, and specifically men in this context, are facing challenges and are being called to rise in a way that maybe they haven't before. And I'd be curious, what is your perception of the world right now as it relates to the evolution of the human species and men? And from that question, what are the primary challenges that you feel are alive in the space right now?
Yeah. I think some of the challenges that we have probably the biggest challenge we have is to not remain or retract or revert back to old ways of being that are reactive strategies, they're familiar strategies in dealing with difficulty and pain and confusion and uncertainty and so forth. And so one of the biggest challenges we have is choosing a new path forward, forging a new path forward. And I think that's a collective challenge, right? And an individual challenge as well, because what I've found in my own personal life and just working with so many people is that when we're pushed to our edges, or when we feel that back's against the wall, the proverbial my back's against the wall, I'm stuck in a rock and a hard place, we tend to just fall back into honestly our highest level of training, right? And what that really means in this instance, in this context, is we're going to revert back to, we're going to autonomically just play out our coping strategies that were forged when we were very young, right? And if we haven't really reevaluated those and reevaluated ourselves, we haven't cultivated a deeper sense of self-awareness as adults in our adult relationships and in our relationship to ourselves and our past and our trauma, if we've experienced that, etc., then we just go back to what has once worked and what's embedded neurologically, physiologically, emotionally, relationally in our bodies. And the greatest challenge we have now, given the times, I don't think the times that we're in are anything new. I think they're amplified and exacerbated by communication, by technology, by social media, by the internet. And I don't mean that in a negative way, like the internet or social media is a demon or the devil. Not at all. It's just, it's being, the message is being amplified. Then when you couple that with, and this is another challenge that we're facing as a byproduct of this, but when you couple that with certain organizations and structures that carry great power in the world, prioritizing a particular message or an agenda or a voice, and I don't mean that in conspiratorial terms. They meaning institutions and organizations that have power and control, that can access mass media. They carry a particular set of ideals and ideologies, and they want to present that to the world. That's what we do. That's what you do. That's what we all do. This isn't anything that's conspiracy based. It's human behavior, right? And so one of the other challenges that we have is deciphering the what is quote unquote true and what is not. What is perpetuated propaganda, and what is vested in a group of people or an organization wanting and needing to survive, right? And maybe even thrive in their own purview, and what is then actually fact and truth. And that's ambiguous in and of itself. That's complex and complicated in and of itself. And so, not to go down the rabbit hole of challenges, but I think there's two big challenges: is deciphering what's really real and true for us, and then acting from a place of pause, slowing down so that we can evaluate what's happening in the world. And then the first one that I mentioned is that, can we play out a new version of self? Can we choose to be different in a world that is rapidly changing, or appears to be rapidly changing? And there is so much conflict and division at the moment. And so with that, can we choose to approach that in a new, empowered way, as opposed to approaching it from a place of contraction and fear, which is what most of us, not all of us, but most of us are accustomed to? Because I'm of the belief that we live, and this is to your first question. I want to respond to that and honor that as well. Physiologically and in this 3D realm, neurologically, our baseline is fear. And what I mean by that is we perceive and see the world through a contracted lens. It's all about survival and threat. Our eyes, that are our largest threat funnels, go out into the world and say, is this a threat? Is that a threat? Is this a threat? Is this person a threat? Is this relationship a threat? We're constantly evaluating threat, right? And so it feels to me that we're at this very critical point of, I'm not saying bypassing that system within us completely. I don't know if that's completely possible, and that's maybe a conversation for another time, but it's beginning to come less from that place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, lots of division, lots of conflict equals lots of opportunity. And the only way we're going to be able to embrace a new way of being or new opportunity is to begin to let the past go. We begin to let the past go by grieving. Now, that's grieving what we thought needs to be. That's grieving old versions of ourselves. That's grieving the things that we really love. It could be freedom for you. It could be something else. It could be an ability to choose what you put into your body and what you don't. It could be an ability to choose how you make this thing called currency or money, right? Like whatever it is for you. It could be your ability to, if you were living in China through the 80s and 90s, when they had one child policy, it could be to choose to have as many children as you want, right? The family that you desire. So it's whatever it is for you, it's how are we going to approach that in a new way? And how can we grieve what we're currently experiencing, which is activating what is ultimately unresolved within us. Hence the extreme division. So I see the greater the division is in a society, the greater the conflict, the greater the disparity in conversation, like extremes in conversation, like, pro this, anti that, anti this, anti pro that. The more that, it just simply tells me that there's more trauma that needs to come out. There's more grief. There's more a letting go that needs to take place. And as that letting go, as that releasing, as that grief takes place, we find ourselves shifting and changing. Now, and I'll say this one last thing on this, and I'll flip it back to you. The issue with grieving, and it's a beautiful process, right? It is a beautiful process to grieve, yet it is so scary to grieve, because when we grieve, we're losing parts of our identity, at least the perception of. And I would say factually as well, we're actually losing parts of our identity. But the association that we have with that is death, because it is an ego death. And we do everything we can to avoid death. And that is evident in the way that the world has been responding to this thing that's happening since 2019, right? Or 2020, say. So we have this innate fear of death that we haven't, quote unquote, conquered, or haven't moved through or overcome or understood or connected to. And we have this struggle with our own mortality. And therefore we do everything we can to avoid grieving, because it's very unpleasant and very uncomfortable. Couple that with living in a world that is about short-term gratification and quick fix and convenience. Grieving becomes an arduous thing to do. It becomes a complication, right? So I'll pause there, and I'll give it back to you, brother.
Okay. Thank you. I love how you go really deep, really quickly, really fast. And you've brought up a very, very important piece, which I'd like to speak to. The grief, I feel, is usually connotated when someone dies in your life, right? And many people don't have an understanding that they have various aspects of their psyche at play here, which are vying for power, which are fighting with each other, and whatever it might be. Now, in this hyper-stimulated, overly noisy world filled with all sorts of distractions, how does one cultivate that space to grieve, to reflect, to go deep, especially when their baseline survival mechanisms are literally trying to keep their lives together, albeit in an unhealthy way at times? How would one do that?
So, I think you've titled this The Evolution of Masculinity, something to that effect, right? And so when we look at men, and we'll use this example, when we look at men, there's a beautiful story that I love to regurgitate or recite. And I'm not sure, I think it was a northern Maori tribe in New Zealand. And many years ago, the Maori people are known for their ability to be warriors and soldiers and in conflict, right? And they're also a beautifully gentle, compassionate folk as well. But there's this story where I'm fairly sure it was a northern tribe, and forgive me because I can't remember the actual name of the clan or the tribe, but when they would come back from war, they would come back from battle, they were not allowed to come back into their communities without first having cleansed themselves of that battle, right? So that means that they had to grieve the loss of their fellow brothers. They had to grieve the fact that they hurt other people, that they killed individuals that had families. They had to grieve the loss of parts of themselves, and they would spend time in this waterfall body of water with elder women and elder men. Wow. And they would cleanse themselves, and they were not allowed to come back until they back into community until they felt healed. So they wouldn't bring that pain and that war back to their families and back to the communities, right? And so that's an example of grieving in community, grieving in tribe. But remember, it wasn't just grieving death. There is an association in our society that the only appropriate time to grieve is at a funeral. And maybe at a wake, or depending on your cultural or religious beliefs, there could be a very short period of time, a few days to a week, where you can openly grieve. But then after that, it's like, well, get on with your life, like it's done now. That in and of itself is very complex and very, very sensitive. But grief isn't just resigned to death; it's loss, and it's also the perception of what was not, that you thought needed to happen. What you're grieving what wasn't, and that could be you're grieving the mother that you never had. And that could be you're grieving the childhood that you never had, because for whatever reason you were caught in a cycle or a loop of parentification or enmeshment or entanglement with one of your parents, and you had to be the adult in that relationship, and you never really got to have a childhood. There's grieving. There is visceral, somatic, physical, emotional stuff that needs to move through your body in order to complete the cycle of that grieving process, or even of that trauma, right? And so when we're talking about how do we grieve, well, firstly, we need to give ourselves permission to grieve. We need to know that it's a healthy part of being human, whether you're being human, full stop. Doesn't matter who you are, how you identify, being human. Unless, of course, you don't identify with human. I don't know. I mean, I can't help you too much there, but like if you're human, then grief, the complexity of being human involves grief. And so, and that can happen multiple times during our lifetime. We can have micro moments of grief and macro moments of grief. A micro moment of grief could be, for example, today, my wife and I were meant to have a pregnancy photography shoot. Christine and I were meant to have a pregnancy photography shoot. And it's so cold here that the photographer, Kimberly's like, it's going to be too cold. Like, you're not going to be able to relax. Like, it's going to be really difficult. And so Christine's disappointed. We've rescheduled it, it's no big deal. But there's a micro moment of grief. Right. She expresses and vocalizes her disappointment. I say, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry I didn't do anything wrong. I say, I'm sorry that you're disappointed. Can I support you in any way? Like, it's okay. Whatever dialogue I have with her, however I hold space for her, but really just with compassion and empathy. So that's the permission to grieve, is the compassion and empathy. And surround yourselves with people that see you. Surround yourself with people that you trust, respect, and revere, where you can grieve openly and not be judged. That's part of the healing process, is to be able to meet people in the space that they are presenting, to not try and change them. If it takes you 3 months, 6 months to grieve, a year to grieve, then so be it. Now, there are gray areas there, of course, as well, because we don't want to prolong the grief either. But sometimes grief honestly just takes X amount of time, longer than we anticipated. We may have to grieve the fact that we thought we should have finished our grieving by now. But essentially, grieving is acceptance as well, right? It's acceptance of what is in that moment, allowing it to pass through us. And the moment we truly, truly accept, right? The moment we truly accept, we're giving ourselves permission to not be dictated to by our past, because we're accepting the circumstances for what they are. And what actually happens is we move through them a lot faster than what we think. So we think we're slowing down because we're in this uncomfortable place. That's not the truth. The truth is we're actually moving through our process exactly as we need to, because we're giving ourselves permission to embrace and welcome the very thing that is present for us right now. It may not be comfortable, may not be the greatest thing that we had hoped for ourselves, but it's part of being alive. It's part of being human. It's part of being in this human experience.
Yeah, just allowing that to land, and just recognizing the significance of what you're speaking to, that grief essentially needs to be normalized for us, not just as men, but as women and human beings to come to terms, to come to completion with the human experience and the various phases and cycles, so that we can actually honor the process of life, because life and death essentially being two sides of the same coin. And for us to evolve and mature into a healthy expression of humanity, then it's important that we as individuals and as a community come together to be seen in our grief, to be seen in our pain, and to be witnessed in our truth. And then this serves as an alchemical catalyst for healing, growth, expansion.
I very much resonate. Very much resonate. I think there's, again, you know, from my own personal experience, there's a sense of wholeness that I'm able to embody and touch when I welcome all sensations, all feelings, all aspects and expressions of self. And the more I learn to do that with minimal judgment, the more whole I truly feel.
Yeah, bringing wholeness into the space. Now, you know, this conversation was titled The Evolution of Masculinity, and clearly what you've just spoken to has touched on the evolution of consciousness as a whole, and is such important and vital information. And just for those who are watching, the reason why the conversation was titled this way was because we specifically wanted to speak to masculinity, but clearly this has needed to come through in the mix. Now, Steph is a presenter on a 5-day accelerator called The Illuminated Man. I'll post the link here. And I'm so honored to have his energy, his presence in that space, and forever feels a call to join. Whether you're a woman that knows a man or a man itself, you can follow the link in the comments or on my profile. But bringing things full circle back to this conversation specifically, now we have identified that our world, which is in a state of division, can be healed when we allow the space for grief and we allow the space for our emotions to be felt and for cycles to come into completion. Now, assuming we're able to move through that transition as a species, what would an embodied, integrated man look like? And you can speak to man, you can speak to man as the human race as well.
Yeah, and so I often get asked that question in different ways, like what you just asked, but in different ways, right? And I think it's a really powerful question. And the first thing that I want to say to that is, and I have a perspective on in terms of, and I pull from Jack Donovan's work here in terms of this. I think there's two questions we're asking. What does it mean to be a good man? And what does it mean to be good at being a man?
Yes.
And the two are actually quite different, right? And what does it mean to be good at being a man? For me, and again, I align with Jack Donovan's view on this, it's really vested and grounded in an evolutionary psychology, how we evolved as a species in community and in tribe over, essentially as hominoids, over millions of years, right? Or at the very, very least, hundreds of thousands of years. And I see that there are some not only characteristics, but markers that define that healthy sense of masculinity. Now, before I even go to that place, where I go to is this, is I can't tell anyone, I can't tell anyone, hey, this is what it means to be a good man. Like, if you do these things and you carry all of these character traits and you go through all of this, you're going to be a good man. You're going to be great at being a man. You're going to be in healthy masculinity. It's not that I can't do that. It's that it's not my place to do that.
Right.
Like, I have a perspective for how I live my life, like what I think constitutes being just a quote unquote good human, good being this overarching concept that we think, well, this is how I want to live my life. And this is all the things that I put into the bucket of good. But let me go back to being good at being a man and being a good man, right? Okay. And so there are a couple of components that define that. One of them is strength, being physically adept, because that is something that gave us great utility. So let me pause there for a moment and just speak to utility. Whether we like it or not, men particularly but as human beings, but men particularly, because we're social beings, right? We're relational beings. Men particularly have evolved a sense of self-worth and a sense of self through their utility. So the more usefulness that they can carry, you know, varied usefulness, specific usefulness, in community and in tribe, whether that's being an exceptional hunter, that's extending the perimeter, that's being able to light a fire and keep the family warm and so forth, and safe. Their sense of self-worth has been derived from those actions. And over many, many years, that's part of our neuropsychobiology still. And so that's one of the contributors. So when we look at, I mentioned strength, let me actually just say mastery. Mastery is the direct contributor to that point there. Strength is also something that we've evolved with. We are physically the physically bigger in terms of our the biological genders, right? Like, and in that physical size and strength, you know, we're I believe it's 70% stronger, you know, generally speaking, in our lower body, and 100% stronger in our upper body, generally speaking, right? Men to women, so biological sex here. And so over years, that has made an impact in the roles that we play, the social roles and the community roles and the cultural roles that we play, okay, in our family dynamics and in our tribal dynamics. Another key point that I've added to this is connectivity. And we've evolved in groups. We've evolved in small groups of people. And what that has meant is that if you were outed of the tribe for whatever reason, because you got lost or because you did something that was quote unquote wrong, and you know, a lot of guilt and shame is linked to these early developmental social structures, right? But if you did something where you were in the out group, it basically meant sure death.
Right.
And so again, we're meaning-making machines, and we're all about survival, and our baseline potentially is fear. So we're always going to want to survive. We're always going to want to remain alive. Hence this interesting relationship we have with death. And so connectivity plays a really, really big part. And so if you can be socially adept, I mean, this becomes so complex. Just look at someone like Jordan Peterson, where he talks about, you know, agreeableness and conscientiousness and not being, and these are the big 5 traits in psychology as well, right? But when you look at that, I'm not saying to be agreeable per se, not that there's anything wrong with that. That's actually healthy as well, and having a balance of that within self, or harmony within self. But I'm talking about being able to be socially adept, honoring yourself and having confidence in your body in terms of strength, mastering skills with your hands. Like when we're speaking specifically to men now, right? These are some of the things, these are some of the points that help men be good at being men. Now, being a good man is a different question, right? Because really what we're looking at is saying, these are my ideals, these are my ideologies. These set of values are going to say to me that this person is good, or this person is approachable, or this person is safe. That's based on your own personal values, your personal history, your upbringing, your familial values, the culture that you grew up in at the time, your self-worth, the trauma or spectrum of trauma that you've experienced. Like there are so many factors that influence that. To say to be a good man is so subjective. And that's another reason why I say you've got to learn to define that yourself.
Right.
But for me, sovereignty and autonomy and agency is a really important part of being an effective human, being a quality human, right? And if we're speaking to men and masculine energetic, particularly that sovereignty for men is really empowering in context. And so the purpose, I think, of saying, hey, not figure it out yourself, but can you define it yourself through your own research, through your own praxis in the world, through your own embodiment, through the observing of your own relationships? Can you do that yourself? Because that's going to be far more empowering, as opposed to someone saying, hey, here are these characteristics of what it means to be a great man. Go ahead and do these things and you'll be great. Now, that may work for some. Like, you know, in the programs that I've developed, like the Conscious Man, for example, or Reclaim Your Kingdom, I have those definitions. Those definitions are for me. And if that resounds with you, if that resonates with you, great. Take it, apply it, observe, and then continue. But if it doesn't, challenge it. Definitely challenge it. and do something different with respect to what aligns with you, but ensure that you know where your come from is. See, when we're talking about, evolution or healthy masculinity or healthy humanhood, one thing I will say is that, I don't want to say this, with respect to healthy humanhood, our ability to be willing to go to the places that are uncomfortable within ourselves, to quote unquote do our inner work, to be aware of our pain or our trauma, or our fears or our unresolved psycho-emotional, psychosocial wounds. Like, if we can really address those, that lays foundations for expansion and growth, because we create spaciousness in our psyche and in our relationships. And in doing so, we begin to, again, come back full circle to grief, because that's part of the process in releasing the past to create spaciousness for a new version of ourselves in the world. And that there, for me, is pivotal if you want to move forward in the world, if you want to be a greater or different version of yourself.
Wow. Drop the mic there. I love how you've brought that full circle and spoken to so many important points, specifically the need for one to define their own benchmark of what it means to be a good, not just a man, woman, human being in this emerging world. And as I see the world and I observe, many people are being fed models of who they should be, how they fit in, how they operate in order to be accepted. So there's actually, at least as I see it, an opposing force that is trying to fit people into a specific mold. But what you're suggesting is that for us to move and rise beyond this situation, beyond this moment, it's going to require each individual to come into their sovereignty, their autonomy, into their agency, and define who they are in the world through opening themselves up to their feelings, to grieve those parts of self that no longer serve, and actually become more.
Yeah. I mean, you can't see that exactly, but behind me I have various books on masculinity and manhood, right? And from various authors. And honestly, I take from, different ethos, different principles and philosophies from each of those authors, and I incorporate them and play them out into my life, and I observe how they play out. Like, we're always standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yes.
We're never learning in silos or echo chambers, right? Again, we're relational beings. But I'm talking about truly defining for yourself, like based on all the information that I've been exposed to with teachers and my own practices and my own relationships and things that I've read and et cetera, right? And I've developed my own programs and my own ethos, but they are really just all elements of other people that I've resonated with deeply. Yes. That I have read their wisdom or been exposed to their wisdom in different ways and shapes and forms, and said, wow, this inspires me. This is true to me. This person is saying this in a way that I haven't been able to articulate it. I've got this. This is what I've been feeling. So I'm not saying, go figure it out by yourself. What I'm saying is arrive to the conclusion by yourself or in your own internal space.
And that's a powerful invitation, because to come to that conclusion, it does take facing oneself and making peace with many paradoxes and choosing to live consciously and by one's own values and ethos. And I love how you are so open with your recognition of all the beings who went before you and how they help shape and weave your worldview. And do you ever find at times that a specific aspect of one philosophy or one belief system falls away and you grieve that part of yourself and you totally shift your perception on things?
For sure. I was training this morning, and I was just having to think about how I personally will shift and change in my view of the world as I'm exposed to to more and more information, right? And it's
Mm.
usually a gradual process. It's not like every hour, every minute, or every day I'm just, oh, yesterday I don't know, I'm a Democrat, and today I'm a Republican, just for the sake.
Right.
I give you a simple, facetious example, but you know, it's over time. I've seen myself shift my perspective on global geopolitical, sociocultural, socioeconomic issues that are permeating our society, but also how I choose to be in the world as well, right? Like what I think is right or wrong in relationship. Right or wrong meaning aligned or misaligned. How do I want to behave? How do I not want to behave in relationship? And how that's changed over the years, because I've been open to learning and growing. And the more open and willing we are to learn and grow through our old paradigms, what we generally see is that we either shift out of the old or it reinforces what we've been practicing. And put, you know, good, bad, wrong, right aside for a moment. It's the process of observation and being willing to be different that really
Right.
sets the tone for how we show up to ourselves and to each other.
Uniqueness, divergence. I very much second that. In order to not just to stand out in the world, but to feel more of yourself, to feel whole, we have to honor our fundamental truth, our essence, our uniqueness, and feel comfortable and safe to express that in the world. And personally, I feel that it's creativity and art that's going to be the catalyst for a harmonized reality. And I would love to just honor your uniqueness and the way that you have synthesized everything that you've experienced in this life and brought it forward into the world, because this is what makes you a pillar and it makes you a beacon. And the invitation for whoever is watching this transmission is to recognize your own uniqueness and to find safe spaces and individuals that will allow you and encourage you to express yourself. And I'm mindful of time here as well, and we could literally, I would love to just riff with you forever, like the infinite riff, and perhaps we can do this again sooner rather than later. But
For sure.
I would love to express that it's your uniqueness that has contributed towards much growth in my life, and the space, the Vanguard, which is the men's brotherhood that I'm creating, is only, it gets better, it evolves, it expands because of your uniqueness into the space. So what would you say is the most unique aspect of your experience as a human being that places you in a position to be leading this forefront, this charge of consciousness and this awakening?
Yeah. So for me, it's really my ability to go to really, really extreme or dark places. And it's really my willingness and ability, and historically that I've done that has given me a very interesting perspective and vantage point on the human mind and human potential and my own life. Look, I really deeply, and it took me a long time to do this, but I deeply surrendered to the proverbial rock bottom, and deeply surrendered to my shadows and to my trauma, and to be willing to face all of that. And when I say surrendered, like I very much reached a point in my life where I had earnestly just surrendered to the fact that I may die through this exploration. I may end up in a mental asylum. I may hurt myself or hurt others. I really, and that was never my intention, of course. And the last point around that was, and I may come through this and be that person that I know intrinsically in my soul of souls that I can be. And very, very blessedly, that's where I ended up. And I'm able to live from that place and that space now. And I do have a capacity to go where most people will not and don't want to go, particularly internally in dealing with the psycho-emotional parts of self and the different areas of my own psyche and my own wounds and my history. And as a an ability to do that, I'm able to hold that space for others. I don't do that for others. I just hold a very non-judgmental, familiar space. It's like, oh, I've been there. Like, your stuff doesn't scare me. I can sit here with you in that, and I'm not going to judge you in it. I've been in some really dark, uncomfortable, very intense places within my own self. And so I'm not saying I'm the only one that's ever done that. It's unique to me. It's unique to my life experience that it really, it's a massively contributing factor to who I am today as a whole.
Thank you, brother. I feel that, and I've witnessed you in some of those moments, and seeing you on your journey as you have moved through those, and how you have integrated those depths into this cohesive expression as a human being and leading from the heart is truly, truly inspirational. So, you give, like, you, and to your point, there's many that I've also able to traverse this darkness, and you are a testament to what is possible when we actually face our darkness. So bringing that in contrast to the collective dark night, so to speak, which is taking place right now, it gives me hope that, there is a strong possibility that we can all traverse this together and come out on the other side in a place where we can perhaps laugh about it, celebrate it, and embrace it for the truth that's underlying it all.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well said, brother.
So, thank you. Thank you, brother. So just want to once again just honor you and honor each individual that has tuned into the transmission today live and in the replays. Feel free to drop your questions. We'll answer when we have the space. Once again, if you are a man, or if you know of a man who would love to start off the year in a really powerful container, to grow, to expand, to learn some processes, some wisdom with respect to embodiment and creation, and learn more about the emerging world of technology as well. Follow the link, thevanguard.one. Look forward to seeing you there, and feel free to share this transmission with anyone that you feel that resonates. So thank you, brother, for your time, for your space. Appreciate you endlessly, and we will speak very shortly.
Thank you, brother. Love you, man.
Love you.
Bye.